Hello, today's going to be short, sweet, and to the point if I can. We're going to discuss, this is a little more on the science and social responsibility end of things. I sort of have multiple series that I have, some on mathematics, some on philosophy, some on education, just things I return to. This one is science and social responsibility. We're going to talk about global warming. And we're going to discuss the question of whether global warming is real or not. I don't think that it even ought to be controversial, but apparently it has been made controversial due to probably a number of influences. First of all, has the question of who hacked those emails in East Anglia ever been solved? I kind of wonder about that. It's an open case, apparently. We have, and who was behind it? The oil companies, Arab nations, Russia. Somebody had to be behind it. I don't think it was just anonymous. I mean, who knows? You know, I mean, I don't even want to speculate, but it's just curious that that story seems to have disappeared. Everybody focuses on the conspiracy around the emails, but nobody ever focuses on who hacked them. Curious. Who would have anything to gain with that. By the way, when you talk about hiding quote-unquote scientific data, that's a specific technical term. It doesn't imply dishonesty. We hide quote-unquote data all the time. If I'm going to consider whether giant blue balls made out of rubber roll faster than little yellow balls made out of silver, for the sake of argument, whichever would roll faster. Technically, gravity would give the same acceleration to both of them, so it would be a question of friction or other forces, aerodynamics, something like that. But if I were to test for something like that, there would be certain variables I would have to, quote, hide. In other words, I would have to hide, obviously we would have different slopes, and so I would have to adjust the data to account for different slopes. Now the reality is, of course, in an experiment like that, you would have the same inclination for the whole experiment. Okay, that's how you would hide the data there. But if you were doing something that would be more complex, like a complicated system like the atmosphere, it'd be a lot harder to reduce to just one or two variables to exclude all these other variables. So that's probably doesn't do justice to what hiding the data means. You know, that's not my area of expertise. I don't claim that it is, but the bottom line is when we talk about hiding the data, that's not necessarily a dishonest thing. There's a lot more ridicule going on with the anti-global warming side that there is on the side that doesn't believe that there's anthropogenic global warming that there is on the side that believes that there is. But that's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is the science. It can be scientifically ascertained that yes, human beings do have an effect on the global temperature. I know that sunspots might conceivably have an influence. That hasn't been ruled out. I know that there are other factors, but it can be scientifically proven that CO2 and methane contribute to the greenhouse effect. Now, that is not necessarily a bad thing if it is within ecological limits. Okay, but it is a fact that the more CO2 and methane human or human-caused activities contribute to the atmosphere, the warmer the Earth is going to get, i.e. it'll be warmer than it would have been otherwise, which might trigger some kind of other effect, a cooling effect. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that the world has to get warmer uniformly, but the bottom line is the more CO2 and methane contributed to the atmosphere, the more it will contribute to the greenhouse effect. That is scientific fact. That can be tested in a laboratory. That can be tested in a laboratory with enough CO2 trapping heat. And if you have a light source and you have CO2 and it traps the heat, then the CO2 will not allow the heat to escape out into the atmosphere again, or the upper atmosphere. So if I have a CO2 layer here, and I have sunlight, you know, beating on it, and then there's a warming. The warming is going to be the energy of the sun that's going to be trapped below it, okay, probably in some kind of convection current. So that is a scientifically verifiable effect. That is not open to debate. All serious scientists believe that. Now, we can question how much of the warming effect would be human caused. We can question how much is too much. But you cannot question the science behind global warming as a legitimate concern. Now, let's look at the record. The Earth has been warming since the end of the Little Ice Age. What ended the Little Ice Age? It's a good question. It just happens to be that the Little Ice Age ended when industrialism took off over Europe, and when CO2 and various industrial gases were being emitted into the atmosphere. Now you could say, well, gee, that's good because it warmed up the Earth, okay? Well, it's neither good nor bad. It's just a physical process. It just happened to warm up the Earth. So the question, again, is a question of balance and limits. You know, does economic growth, is that the end-all and be-all of our existence, or do we have to consider the health of the planet? I think we have to consider the health of the planet. I think we have to make a hard call here on whether we're going to value so-called economic growth above and beyond the health of the planet. If there is a known scientific process that has more proof to it than any kind of scientific proof of a whole lot of other things that we rely on with speculation, like, let's say, cosmology, okay? Cosmology or string theory, you know, a lot of these things have very tenuous proof. They're theoretical models at work, but the proof is very tenuous. The greenhouse effect, on the other hand, can easily be verifiable. It can be tested. It can be shown in a laboratory. And I would argue that even if the greenhouse effect has been something benevolent since the end of the Little Ice Age, which ended in, not the big ice age, but the little one that ended sometime in the 1800s, even if that's the case, it's not going to be benevolent if it just keeps going. The Earth is going to warm. I mean, that's just the bottom line. If there's a runaway greenhouse effect, it's going to keep going. And it will create not necessarily uniform warming, or even necessarily, you can't even necessarily prohibit the possibility of it ricocheting another direction, affecting the ocean currents, and then creating yet another ice age again. Okay, so the bottom line, though, is that still the greenhouse effect is a real effect. It can be measured. It cannot be denied. And I believe that humanity doesn't have the wisdom to manage a runaway process like a runaway greenhouse effect or runaway methane emissions. We've got to do something. We've got to do something. CO2 itself is necessary to the atmosphere. CO2 itself is necessary to life, but runaway CO2 is bad. So the question is, what's the right balance? Well, the right balance is we have mandated limits. We invest in electric cars. We invest in any number of inventions, probably a lot of which have been suppressed. You know, patents bought out by oil companies because oil companies don't want to go out of business. It's just the way capitalism works. If I were the head of an oil company, I wouldn't want to go out of business either. But I can tell you this much. I'd be investing in some kind of property somewhere in some remote region where I'd withstand the storm. I'm just saying if I were a selfish person and I were in that position, which is, you know, selfish big businessman is almost a redundancy, okay? It's an what do you call it? Not an oxymoron, a redundancy. I mean, you're just saying the same thing over and over again. By definition, most of your big businessmen are selfish. And they control the politicians, the big religious institutions, the education system. They're not going to tell you the real truth. The media is going to tell you all about Jodie Foster and Mel Gibson, and how they're friends, and maybe Jodie Foster is going to convert, you know, to the other way, you know what I mean? Okay, but, you know, they're not going to tell you about the things that are really important. It's going to be all about Lindsay Lohan, all about the celebrities and the royal wedding. But what about something that's real, like the fate of the planet, species? I'm not a biologist. I'm not an expert. So if I can figure out that we're being lied to by corporate interests, I think that most of the scientists can too. So these scientists signing some kind of petition stating that, well, you know, global warming is a hoax and everything, these guys either aren't really scientists, which I doubt, I think they probably are, or there's been some money changing hands. Can't prove it. For legal reasons, I'm not going to allege it, but that's my honest suspicion. Thank you.